Okay, I'm going to make a start. So, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome. So, thank you for joining us on this deep dive, which today is about data and evidence and performance. My name is Tamsin Shuka, and I am a commissioning manager. And today I'm joined by several of my colleagues, and we will be today sharing our thinking about the data and evidence that helps to understand and demonstrate the enablers and impact of community-based advice. And we'll also be outlining the performance measures that we are proposing. And what we're really looking for today is to hear your feedback to this so that we can shape this work together. So just a bit of an overview of today's agenda. So I'll just start in a moment with just a few housekeeping. Then we're going to look at what were the foundations for developing our evidence approach. I will take you through how our approach to performance measures and then share our proposed measures. Then there's an opportunity for you to feedback. And then we will also be talking about evaluation and learning. And last but not least, talk about our data requirements. There's a really quick moment for some Q&As then, which are really just to address anything burning. And then I'll talk to you about the next steps in the commissioning process and a survey that is available. So just the housekeeping items, which is you've all got your cameras and mics off for now. We will turn them on later for engagement in the breakouts. But I think that you should be able to have access to the chat function to share thoughts or questions as we go along. So please feel free to do that. And don't worry if you need more reflection or you want to go back and talk to colleagues back in your organisation before you reflect openly. There's going to be an opportunity to complete a survey for your feedback afterwards. And the final thing to say is that this is recording and we will be sharing these slides afterwards. So you'll have all of this content, so you don't need to scribble furiously. Hopefully you can just engage. So let's begin. So I think it would be helpful if we started with a bit of a recap on the foundational work that we've put in place so that we can then have confidence in what we're talking today, which is about our evidence approach. So we know that in order to measure what truly matters, we first need to be really clear about what it is that we value about community-based advice, what the purpose is of the grants. So as many of you remember, we took the time back in December and January to really work with the market to come up with our clear definitions about what it is that we value about community-based advice. And then we developed our purpose and definitions and ambition definitions that we shared and discussed at the summer. We then worked with independent evaluators and frontline advisors to build a shared theory of change. And then using both those definitions and the theory of change, we were able to develop our core objectives and a logic model. And that helps us to make sure that we are understanding the causal flow, but also what are all the resources that go into supporting people in debt and how that leads to meaningful outcomes. And using that, we can then develop our evidence strategy. And this is a best practice approach, and it gives a strong foundation for giving us assurance that our evidence strategy, which is about performance measures, evaluation, learning and data requirements, will reflect therefore those priorities. The government guidance refers to it as a golden thread, so you should be able to clearly see how what we value about community-based advice that we've been sharing for several months is visible throughout and represented in our evidence ambitions. And then the final thing to say about our overview of our approach is that we've always applied the principles when thinking about the fact that data should be proportionate and appropriate, meaningful and actually used. We want to avoid collecting data for data's sake, and that everything we are collecting should be used to help us learn and improve. So just a really quick overview about the ambitions and value. Obviously, we want community-based advice to be open to all, but especially focused on those who need it most. We want services to be place-based, local, accessible, and trusted. So we might be able to support people who might not have access to advice otherwise, that they're very rooted in communities, and those local networks might expand our reach or help us to achieve additional outcomes for clients. And obviously, ultimately, we want to minimise the impact of problem debt on people's lives. So that translates into these three core objectives that are interconnected. Obviously, the first one will be very familiar. It is core debt advice provision. So that's about high quality, accessible, regulated advice that is tailored to support the needs of the client and achieve the best available outcomes. The second core outcome is what we've been talking about, community. It's both community access, being able to, through our networks and our local positioning, be able to create greater access for local people to be able to access advice. But it's also about community outcomes, which is that those community networks enable us to be able to potentially get wider outcomes for clients by referring them for food or energy or hardship, or maybe even more efficient or effective outcomes, which could be through local relationships with local authorities about local authority debts and such. And then the final core objective is what we're calling enabling. So that's all the things which enable you to be really effective at delivering community-based advice. So that's about organisational resilience, workforce wellbeing, continuous improvement. And we wanted to make sure that we included that. So we were really clear in such a long-term grant that we were thinking about those elements as not just the first, which is about the core debt advice provision. And then the final slide in this section, I will not go through, but you can see that it's there, and then it gives you an opportunity to look at this later when you've got the slides. But we've used this to create a logic model which is split by those three objectives, and that's very helpful, especially when it comes to thinking about evidence, because it helps us to realise where we are in those different journeys on those three objectives, and therefore what's meaningful to measure. Is it activities? Is it outputs? Is it outcomes? And if you're new to logic models, just think of it as a bit of a roadmap. It helps us to think about from our inputs and activities through to the difference that they make. So now on to our performance approach and the proposed measures. So when it comes to measuring performance for the Community-Based Debt Advice Grants Programme, we are intending on taking a holistic approach. So what that means is, rather than looking at any measures in individual isolation, we are going to be considering them together. And this helps us then to kind of reflect more of the real world complexity that you're operating in, and it should bring more nuance and fairness into how we assess performance. So we're using what's called a balanced scorecard approach. And what that means is that when we're looking at something like client volumes, we're doing that alongside looking at client experience and satisfaction and outcomes. And that will mean that it helps us to understand not just what's been delivered, but how well it's been delivered. And our overall rationale for this is, our ambition is that we want to encourage reflection and improvement throughout the life of the grant, not just compliance. So this is an overview of the performance KPIs. And as we can see, they're in those three areas that we had just looked through in terms of the objectives and the logic model. So in core debt advice, we're looking at outcomes, client experience, quality and reach. And then in community, it's about partnerships and awareness, understanding and responding to local need and community-based outcomes. And then in enabling, it's about continuous improvement, evidence and adaptation, workforce wellbeing, and learning and sharing. Now, because of those last two areas, we haven't yet really developed and verified what are the most appropriate ways to measure. Our ambition initially is to start with the first area, the core debt advice, as being our operational KPIs. So what we're going to do now is talk through each of those with you. So I will first hand over to my colleague Madeline, who's going to talk to you about outcomes.
Hello, everybody. Oh, something funny has happened to my Teams and it's all gone grey, but no, not to worry. I can still see the slides. My name is Madeline. I am Senior Insight Manager in the Insight and Evaluation team, and I look after our customer surveying, including our customers in debt advice, but also our customers in our pensions guidance and pension-wise teams. I don't know, you are able to use reactions, I think. Can I just get a quick thumbs up if you on the call are familiar with the outcomes work that we do at the moment and the packs that we provide quarterly to our current community-based debt advice providers? Good, we've got some thumbs up there. Not masses, so I'll talk you a little bit through that in a minute. But we'll start with what we're looking to achieve in the next round of commissioning. So our overall ambition here when it comes to measuring outcomes is to understand the difference made. This is the whole purpose of debt advice, and we are committed to understanding that and to continually improving it, looking for tangible improvements in our clients' financial situations and well-being, and not just looking at their experience of advice, although that is, of course, still very important. So moving on from that, we recognise that this is a really complex area. We know that the difference made, however we define that, and we'll come to talk about that later, is influenced by a lot of factors outside of your control, and it often, in many cases, outside your client's control as well. So we don't want to impose fixed measures right from the start. We really want to take time to get this right and to learn alongside you. Fortunately, we're not starting from scratch. We have a nice history of capturing both the direct result of advice sessions like understanding, action started and progressed, and moving on then into longer term financial wellbeing outcomes, things more like control of one's financial situation, well-being, and more sort of tangible financial outcomes such as debt reduction. We currently have KPIs that sit in elements of both of those areas. So some of those which are direct results of advice sessions, some of which are longer term outcomes. And we also analyse, although you don't necessarily see this in your quarterly packs, we analyse key drivers to understand to what extent those shorter and more immediate outcomes drive the longer term outcomes. So what I mean by that is we can run a statistical analysis where we can take the answers from customers who have been surveyed to ask about their experience of advice and the sort of very early results of that advice, and we can look statistically at the influence that those things have on our financial wellbeing outcomes. So, for example, we know that knowing the next steps and understanding the next steps to sorting out your debt problem is the biggest driver of the overall outcomes we currently measure, which is great because it's one of our current KPIs. But we're committed to reviewing all of this and making sure that we've got it right to the future. So our roadmap to getting there, we're currently developing our evidence base on longer term outcomes, and we're refining those statistical models to understand how debt advice can maximise influence over those outcomes. I'll talk to you a bit more about what we're doing practically there in a second. For this community-based debt advice commissioning programme, we're proposing that we will evolve our KPIs over the course of the grant. So we'll shift our focus generally over the course of the grant towards longer term outcomes and difference made over a period of 1 or 2 years, and we'll work with you on that. Everyone's in if you'd like to flip me onwards, thank you. So our current approach, this is what some of you have just given me a thumbs up that you are familiar with, but for those of you who aren't, we currently survey customers at 2 points in their journey through debt advice. Obviously, consent is gained early on by debt advice providers. We then survey customers roughly about 3 or 4 weeks before, post their first interaction with debt advice. We then wait until their case becomes inactive, so we can assume that their journey has ended, and we then do a follow-up survey within about 4 to 6 months post the advice journey end. So those surveys cover everything from customer satisfaction, experience, short-term outcomes to longer-term outcomes. And we have KPIs that are set along the way there. So understanding that really key driver of outcomes, resolution of a problem, and we also look at well-being. Now, the KPIs aren't all of it. We also measure a much wider set of outcomes. You can see some of those just down on the right-hand side in terms of financial outcomes and well-being outcomes. And those key drivers analysis shows us the relationship between the two. We then share those results with our providers at a quarterly level, but we also look at them on an annual level, and we use those results for lots and lots of purposes internally, whether that's policy influencing, future service design, etc. You could flip me on, Tamsin. So in terms of evolving that approach, we are reaching the end of our current contract with our supplier who currently does those surveys, and we are evolving our approach to realign with our new corporate strategy, etc., and also in line with the timing of this commissioning-based exercise. So one of the things that we want to do is make a clearer delineation between customer experience and longer term outcomes. So my colleague Avon is going to speak to you in a few minutes about the customer experience element of that. The work that we do with our research suppliers focusing on outcomes is going to become much more focused on outcomes so that we can look at difference made. And we know that that's part of a wider ecosystem with lots of influences on outcomes. So we want to focus our measurement on identifying the gap between our desired impact and our delivered impact, and within that gap understand which customer needs can be better met by improved service delivery, which can be met in other ways, perhaps by improved partnership or referral pathways, which can be supported via external influencing, perhaps policy routes, different ecosystem, and inevitably there are going to be some which are without the remit of any of our influence as well, so we want to identify those. So that's roughly how we're evolving over the next few years. What will be really, really helpful from all of you in the feedback sessions is a few reflections on the following. So we've heard from the market that a focus on outcomes is welcome, and that is music to my ears as a researcher. But we would really like to understand that in a little bit more depth. So is it that we need a broader set of outcome measures? Is there something missing in terms of what we currently measure? Or is it more about depth? Is there something about understanding the difference made in a more qualitative approach? Do we need, for example, more case studies, more qualitative research? Is it about a focus on different outcomes, perhaps? Are we not measuring the right things? Is it about data at a more local level? Or is it about how MAPS uses outcomes data in our performance conversations in terms of what's a KPI and what's not a KPI? And more kind of generally overall, one of the things that I'm really interested when we kind of start to pass out these different types of measurement into customer experience, short-term outcomes, longer-term outcomes, where do we draw that line of accountability with debt advice providers? So when it comes to setting KPIs, where is it that you feel comfortable saying, yes, we've got enough control over that for us to be able to say you can measure us on it? So we can come back to all of that in the feedback sessions. That's me on outcomes. I think we're passing over to Avon.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Lovely segue there for Madeline. So hopefully a little bit of context of where we're at with kind of outcomes, meaning longer term and financial well-being. So I'm going to talk to you about customer experience, and I saw the thumbs go up. So some of you may already know how we do it. And as Madeline mentioned, it's currently all incorporated, and we are splitting out interactions as part of our customer experience. So I just want to run through what we're looking to do here. It's about moving beyond CSAT. We're shifting from just CSAT and rolling outcomes into one. So we're splitting that into interaction outcomes, and then also the longer term financial well-being outcomes that Madeline's mentioned, and they are obviously interlinked. We know that the drivers of longer term financial well-being outcomes are the experience and interaction outcomes that come from some of the more in-moment monitoring, and as senior customer experience manager, I'm responsible for the in-moment measurement of customer insight, particularly around satisfaction, experience and complaints. So I'm just going to run you through our approach, and it will apply to CBDA, and it's around holistic CX management measurement components. What we're looking to do, similar to Tamsin right at the beginning, is do a more holistic view and measurement of customer experience. That's about in-moment outcomes, journeys, and how customers think and feel at each stage. At the bottom of this slide, I've just put the components that we're looking to make sure that we're measuring for customers. So it's journey interactions. And what I mean by that is what happens in a journey. So how often do we engage with them in debt advice journeys? It can be frequent, and it often is, and it's often complex. So it's about what happens within a whole journey at each interaction stage. Customer perception. So this is about what customers think and feel about their journey. So we know that it's not a one and done deal majority of the time, particularly around CBDA. So it's about how they feel about experience while they're going through debt advice. And then interaction outcomes, as already laid out, it's around what do customers intend to do or do immediately after interactions. And that's, again, linked to what Madeline said and our longer term view of outcomes. Understanding that really early on does help with the drivers and early identification of any areas of improvement or interesting insight that we can take away and drive improvement from. Next, thank you. So what does that mean? So holistic CX measurement, what does it look like in practice? So just on the left-hand side, journey interactions, that's around touch point wait times, journey dropout rates, what's happening within the journey that we can understand, monitor, and just keep an eye on, and any early indications of customer experience that might be impacted. Customer perception, a lot of you will be familiar with some of these metrics. So it's around customer satisfaction, customer feedback, complaints, and some of the leading metrics in there that we're looking to introduce as part of MAPS customer experience measurement is empathy, professionalism, and knowledge, because that's the biggest key drivers for customer experience within interactions. So we're separating them out, but to build this more holistic view is a very key part. It's the thinking and feeling piece. And then interaction outcomes is the understanding what immediate next steps and recommendation potentially that customers may do after each individual touch point. And how does that build up to be the longer journey that customers will go through when they're engaging with community-based advice. On the right-hand side, what does that mean? So alongside the MAP standards that my lovely colleagues are going to cover shortly, it's the introduction of dedicated CX KPIs and PIs, something that we haven't done before, but we're looking to introduce, and that will also apply to CBDA. We're going to continue the CSAT measurement. It's just going to form part of a larger branch of metrics to allow for this holistic customer experience measurement. Incorporation of interactions, as we've said, we're splitting out from financial wellbeing outcomes into interactions, and then an aggregated CX score. So essentially the leading metrics that you see on the left-hand side around customer perception will form an aggregated CX score so that we can have a holistic view, but a single measure around customer experience. And then the introduction of some operational indicators around the journey interactions, specifically around customer experience. Now, we are still developing this approach within MAPS, particularly in the customer experience and quality team. So I've outlined some potential KPIs and performance indicators here. So on the left-hand side, we've got aggregated CX score and obviously complaints. And then on the right-hand side, these are just indicators, but it's around complaints resolved, CSAT understanding, clarity of next steps, and then some CX indicator thresholds against operational delivery metrics. So that is things like the journey dropout rates, etc., on the left-hand side. And as with the outcomes piece, this piece, we are looking to develop this as we go. So we're looking to seek your views today in the feedback session, particularly around two key areas, which is what measurements would you find the most useful and most challenging to embed, and why? Because this is a slightly more holistic approach than we've taken before. And although some of you may understand what we've done up until now, it might be fresh for you. So please do feedback in around that. And then the second part that we're really looking to understand is how can we ensure that this approach is proportionate and drives the right behaviours within community-based debt advice. We want to make sure that we're measuring a holistic CX, but we're doing it in the right way. We're capturing the data that will really make a difference and be meaningful to drive improvement, not just capturing it for the sake of it. And I think that is the last bit of my slide. Thank you very much. And I am handing over to Kelly.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Avon. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Rolls, and I'm a lead quality manager here at MAPS, working in the customer experience and quality team. So on these next two slides, I'm going to walk through how we propose to measure, monitor, and continually strengthen delivery of the MAP standards and our customer experience principles. So the KPI and performance indicator model gives us a consistent and transparent way of understanding how well services meet the standards. It supports not just monitoring, but also governance, proportionate oversight, and the ability to target improvement activity where it's going to make the biggest difference. So first, the framework gives us a consistent way to measure quality and compliance across all delivery partners and across all service channels. This is important because it creates a single shared definition of what minimum standards can look like. This is essential for fairness, calibration, and learning right across the system. Secondly, it gives us a balanced view of performance. So instead of relying on a single number or a single interaction level view, we can look across multiple layers of overall performance, variations by standards and by delivery channel, and how well scoring might align. This will allow us to identify patterns and risks really early on. The third benefit is being able to understand the strength of governance and internal controls environment. We know that quality isn't only about what happens in the case notes, it's also about the organisational structures, training, processes and controls that sit behind that delivery. We also gain evidence that directly guides improvement and calibration activity. This is where we can target support, identify training needs, and work collaboratively with delivery partners on uplift. It's deliberately designed to be developmental and a supportive model. And finally, it gives us a clear and proportionate mechanism for monitoring the MAP standards. This ensures that while services are supported to succeed, we also have transparency and accountability in how quality is tracked. So the approach to the primary KPI sits on this slide, which is overall compliance with the MAP standards measured through the customer-facing assessment. Now, the customer-facing assessment, for those that might not know on this call, is a way of measuring files. So an assessment done by delivery partners and then an assessment done by a third-party independent organisation which produces an outcome. So this is our top level view of quality, looking at the average compliance score across all standards across sampled interactions. So using a 3-month rolling window, it'll give us our headline measure of whether services are consistently meeting the expectations of the standards. Alongside the proposed primary KPI, we will also use a set of complementary performance indicators. Now, these will give us the extra detail to understand service performance and target support effectively. So the first one, compliance against individual standards. This allows us to look at each standard in isolation and understand which specific areas are strong and which may need development. It's really useful for identifying systemic issues with particular standards or steps in the customer journey. The second, compliance by delivery channel. So as we move, or indeed have moved into a world of multi-channel delivery, including face-to-face that could be supplemented by telephone, video and digital advice, it's essential we understand quality and its consistency across all channels. Different channels could carry different risks, so this indicator helps us understand where channel-specific improvements may be needed and the ability for us to support with that. The third area focuses on variance in scoring. This looks at the alignment between grant holder scoring and independent assessment scoring using the MAPS Assessor Toolkit, which will be accessible to all. Variance can really help surface calibration needs, differences in interpretation, or potential issues with case recording. It's a really valuable diagnostic tool that allows feedback from all sides. And then the final one, the controls environment. So this draws on the control self-assessment, which is a tool MAPS use to oversee the quality and compliance of services. This shifts the lens from just interaction level performance to the wider governance and processes that underpin quality. It helps identify how strong the internal environment is in terms of training, oversight, risk management and compliance infrastructure. So together, these 4 performance indicators support a holistic and proportionate assurance approach. Hopefully they will give the insight needed to celebrate strengths, understand risks, guide targeted support and uplift service quality over time. When you look at the model as a whole, it provides a robust foundation for both monitoring and continuous improvement, and hopefully it ensures that we can uphold the MAP standards, protect consumers and maintain consistent, high quality, outcome focused debt advice across the entire supply chain. At the bottom of the slide there, you'll see an important note. So the rolling KPI approach means that we can apply the measure with awareness of sample size, limitations given the size of some of the regional areas. So just a final note and just for some reflections here, just before we move on to the final slide from me is, so thinking about some of these performance indicators, which of these would challenge your existing structures the most, and what support would you need for MAPS during this mobilisation time? So if you could start kind of thinking about those things now, then that would be really, really useful. And then on to the next slide. So this slide, we're really focusing on community and the key enablers that underpin community-based debt advice. These areas are all embedded within the MAP standards. And what we want to do today is gather your views on how we best evidence and articulate value in these spaces. So the most important point to emphasise is these areas are not about creating new KPIs or rigid metrics at this stage. Instead, the MAP standards already set the minimum expectations on approach and strategy for services. So what we're looking for is some early thought around a clear rationale for your approach, how it aligns with the intent of the standards, and how you will regularly review and iterate that approach to ensure that it remains fit for purpose. Longer term, as we build shared insight across different local contexts, we may start to see patterns or common indicators emerge, but we're not applying that right now. So starting with the communities section here, this is where the unique value of CBDA really sits. For local partnerships, we're asking you to think about the rationale. Why have you chosen this model of partnership? How does it support trust and access in your community, and how will you test whether these relationships are meaningful and effective over time? Similarly, for trust and awareness, we want to understand how you plan to build recognition in the community, how you might sense check whether people know you're there, and how you'll use feedback or local insight to adapt your approach. When it comes to meeting local need, we do recognise this varies widely place to place. So we're asking, what indicators of need do you think are most meaningful for the communities that you serve, and how you will review those as the service grows and evolves. And finally, we're interested in how community networks contribute to outcomes, not as a metric, but as a narrative. Over time, what is the added value you're seeing because of your embeddedness in the local ecosystem? And then onto the enablers section. So again, the standards give us the minimum expectations around the conditions that support effective delivery. For continuous improvement, we want you to be able to describe your learning cycle, how you capture insights, how you might test changes, and how do you review whether those changes make a difference. For evidence and adaptation, this is about how you'll use complaints, feedback, local intelligence, and any other trends to shape delivery, and also how you review those insights. Workforce wellbeing is a key enabler within the standards, and here the focus is on how you might support staff capability and retention, how you might monitor experience and workload, and how wellbeing is built into your operating model. Finally, learning and sharing is about how you create a culture of ongoing development, both within your service and across the broader community ecosystem. We're interested in how you will capture and share learning and what value you expect this to generate. There will be an opportunity for you to feed into some of this. Your early thinking to this approach is really, really valuable. Your insight and views will help us understand what good looks like in diverse communities, and help us build a long-term approach to evidencing the unique values of community-based debt advice. And I will hand over to my colleague Nadia.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'm Nadia Ilahi. I'm a Senior Contracts Manager here at MAPS in the debt function. I have two very brief slides that I'll be talking through with you, and first of which is REACH. So what we basically have here is we want to basically be able to understand actually how you are measuring your outcomes and all of those. And in order to do that, we will need to understand actually how many clients you are going to be serving. The expectation here is that you will be setting the number of clients that will that you will look to be helping on an annual basis, which will then be profiled across into months. The idea is that the numbers that you will set in terms of clients will be according to your delivery model and in accordance to your community and what you are looking to achieve within your community and your proposal to us. How we expect you to monitor this, it will be through the number of clients served, and the definition of clients served is basically looking at individual clients here. If a case continues, it will count as a singular client. And where there is material change to a client, where a client returns with material change, this will then count as a new client. We recognise that actually where there is material change in circumstances, so it could be even partway through giving advice that material change occurs, this will count as a new client because new advice would need to be given, need to factor in time that is factored into this, and actually it will be a very different potentially methodology of delivering advice to your clients too. Moving on to grant methodology, management methodology, we thought it'd be actually good to fit this in because we want an overview in terms of how we grant manage. Now, MAPS has an approach of a very structured approach to grant management, and we're basically designing it to ensure there is transparency, accuracy, and flexibility in our grant management approach. The structure will consist of monthly reporting, quarterly reporting, and an annual/strategic way of reporting. Now, the reason why I put /strategic is because actually it might not be annual. As we know, these will be potentially 7 to 9 years, and so actually annual might be too frequent based on the delivery models and what we need to review here. So on a monthly performance management, what we are looking to do is to keep it as simple as possible, and it will be looking at your core KPIs, so the 4 core composites that have been discussed today. And we want to keep it very simple by looking at a RAG status for you to basically report those to us on a RAG status basis. And then for you to report any key risks and any emerging issues that we need to be aware of and familiar with. On a quarterly basis, we would like for you to monitor and feedback to us about what you have in your ops plan. So we will monitor you against your ops plan. So this will give you an opportunity to look at what's happened in your previous quarter, what's coming forward, and tell us about what you what's been happening in those sense. And then we'll look at your outcomes as well. The other thing we want to do is we want to look at continuous improvement. So within your proposal, you'll be looking at continuous improvement. So what actions have been delivered? What are you looking to deliver? And actually, what have we gained from that? So what efficiencies have been gained? We'd want to understand the impact that it's had and what it means to your clients. Alongside this, we'll also look at your financial position. So we'll basically look at actually where what had you planned to spend, what have you actually spent, and do we need to look at any changes going forward as well? And then on an annual and strategic view, what we are basically looking at here is a relationship health check here. And it's really important to us that we look at the softer side of things here, because our key is the relationship that we have with our suppliers as well. So it's looking at improving our strategic alignment between us and our grant holders. We're looking at supplier innovation and expertise. We want to make sure that we're working in the most collaborative way with yourselves, and we want to make sure that we're mitigating against any risks as effectively as possible. And more importantly, we need to ensure that we're building good trust between ourselves and yourselves. So it'll be based on a two-way type of communication. It will be looking at trust, communication, empathy, and we want to make sure that we have a win-win orientation here. And then moving on to financial reporting. If you're already a grant holder, you'll already be familiar with this. We will basically be operating using a financial methodology. So this is a breakdown of the costs that you will basically, that you're proposing that you will incur in the year. And it will basically be broken down, looking at service delivery costs, service support costs, and full cost recovery and your overheads. So the service delivery costs will include stuff like your delivery partner costs, your FTEs that will be on the ground delivering the service themselves. Your service support will basically look at your main key lead organisation and their project support costs, and then your full cost recovery, I think, is quite self-explanatory in terms of overheads. What we'll do is we will monitor you against this on a quarterly basis, but we will ask for a profile broken down on a monthly basis. So what it will do is it should correlate to your ops plan. And so we can see actually what activities have incurred, what costs have incurred, actually do we need any movements, and what are the variances. We'll also work with you on your variances. So we'll look at the forward planning in terms of moving them forward and actually how we can utilise any underspends if there are any underspends there. And I'll hand back to Tamsin.
Thank you so much, Nadia. So just to help us take all of that in, it's useful maybe just to step back and look at all of those key elements together. So all of those here in this diagram that are in pink are the performance measures that we are thinking about in terms of our ambition and what we want to value and understand for community-based debt advice. And the first column are the ones that will form the KPIs. And then obviously we've just looked at the things in light blue, which will be grant management. So it's useful to recognise that that is part of our overall thinking around performance. And then I will come in a moment just to also add in what we're anticipating on delivering in this space in relation to evaluation. But there's quite a lot from us. So we're now really keen to hear back from you. What we've done so far in this session is outlined our approach to performance, showed you the underpinnings that have led us to our thinking, and we're really keen to now hear your views about, you know, is what we're suggesting feeling about right? Do you think anything's missing? Do you think anything needs improving or thinking through a bit further? And it's your chance to help influence the measures that we put in place on this programme. Before we move into this, I want to just explicitly say that sometimes when we move into a breakout, we do lose a few people. And I know that this is the point where some people can feel less comfortable. So I want to say that for those individuals, just be fine to stay in listening mode. And then, you know, when the breakout finishes, we'll all come back to the main room and we've got a couple more topics to come on to. So do please stay with us. So we're now going to move into breakouts, and the first thing that you'll be able to do as a group is to be able to select of the topics we've just covered which one is the priority for you to discuss. We've got about 25 minutes for this, so we expect that most groups should be able to cover 2 topics in detail, or 3 if you're a bit speedier. So Amy, can I ask you to move us into the breakout rooms, please? Welcome back, everyone. So hopefully that enabled some useful conversation. So we're just going to go around to hear some key feedback from each of the groups. So if I could ask the facilitators just to prepare a couple of things. If you want to start with telling us the topic that you are giving us the feedback on, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to do it in reverse order. So if we could start with room 6, which is fee, please.
Oh, absolute wild card there, Tamsin. I thought I had 5 rooms to get ready for this.
I'm going to count us down.
So in our room, we had a discussion on 3 topics. We talked about the outcomes, customer experience, and we talked about the quality measures as well. On the outcomes, a really interesting discussion about, you know, potentially some of the challenges of the current approach of you know, sample size, acknowledging, you know, changes in the number of grants that we're going to have in place for community-based, and you know, some of the challenges and risks that come with that, and also some of the sort of you know, potential muddling that gets created with, you know, diverse supply chains, an extra third party then coming in and doing surveys. So some interesting discussion about you know, potentially shifting a focus and whether, you know, a more immediate sentiment based kind of surveying that is actually led by providers might be a useful thing. Common theme across all our discussions is about, you know, sort of proportionality and not creating an industry of reporting or, you know, putting a lot of burden and taking additional resource away from the services that we want to be delivered. Really interesting discussion on customer experience and the sort of challenge of balancing, you know, what we've discussed in other sessions about a really flexible, tailored, client-centered approach to delivering advice, and how that potentially can rub up anything that is too fixed in terms of a perception of what a good customer experience is, that actually a good customer experience is about the experience for that individual customer, not a sort of cookie cutter way of looking at things. And on the quality side, again, we discussed whether there might be some room, particularly around the newer areas, for a bit of a cultural shift. So rather than necessarily having a measurement framework and lots of surveys, whether some of this can be done through more of a kind of learning and sharing approach.
Thank you so much, Fee. That was excellent feedback. It sounds like a really good discussion. Right, room 5, which is Matthew.
We'll try and do one slightly different from Fee. We started off slow, but we got some really good discussion at the end. So a key one for us was the reach and grant management topic. As far as the reach, while clients served was broadly agreed that makes sense, there was some concern around the complexity of those clients not really being measured at any stages, and there being no real difference between a client which takes 6 months of very in-depth work from a caseworker or a client that takes a quick 20-minute phone call initially. They would both be effectively of the same value for that KPI. And yeah, there was the concern, well, one is going to take significantly more staffing, time, brain power and stress than the other. And then also within the grant management, we talked a little bit around the reporting cycle. There was definitely an appetite for a greater visibility of what goes into that reporting cycle, the level of detail needed, the ins, the outs, how much detail then comes back from MAPS. We had one person in our group who was currently sitting within a lead org who handles that reporting with MAPS. And then most of the group were in the supply chain, not necessarily having any view or idea of what kind of details goes through the MAPS because it was just done for them.
Right.
And there was definite appetite for more visibility of what's reporting into MAPS and then more of a relationship with MAPS as a whole, instead of just feeling that they're very, very remote and just getting that feedback as it comes through their lead org at whatever cycle the lead org decides. So a key interest in having some kind of insight into that relationship or being involved in it at some stage.
Thank you. Really useful feedback there. Right, room 4, Nadia.
Thanks, Tamsin. So we mainly spoke about the customer experience is what we basically spoke about, and what we basically discussed was actually what is the best way to kind of do this, what do we need to be kind of thinking about and considering. One of the things that was discussed was dropout rates, and should we be looking at measuring that? How do we understand why do clients drop out? At what point are they dropping out? And are these things that we're going to be looking at and measuring, which was a really good discussion around that. We then went on to talking about to what extent are we going to break down our customer experience and the surveying around the different type of client groups. So how are we going to evolve that? So there might be different ethnic backgrounds, for example, those with more mental health issues, all of those type of things. Is there a way for us to break that down and actually really kind of measure those customer experiences for those clients? Because we might get different outcome results, to be honest with you, based on looking at those different groups. And then the other one that we might want to look at is channels as well. Specifically, actually, do we get different outcomes when it's based on channels as well? General
Thank
view was that
sorry.
actually, sorry, Tamsin. General view was that actually it's heading all in the right direction, to be honest with you. It's really nice to kind of see that it's not just about volumes, and actually it's a variety of things that we're looking at. So those KPIs felt quite comfortable to everybody in that sense. So yeah, and then we also went on to actually what are the best bits to be looking at and the most valuable parts in the customer journey to be reviewing and looking at the CSATs. And one of the things that we were saying was that actually, do we want to look at it before the debt advice element? So just before they've got to debt advice, how long is that wait time, for example? And does that kind of, for the customer experience, does that change things, because you might be waiting a long time as well for an appointment? Actually, how much advice is given in that initial contact? All of those type of things were basically were being discussed there. We did discuss reach as well, and it was more about actually how proportionate will this be, even though we've said that suppliers will tell us what the volumes will be. How will that be assessed? So will it be quantity versus quality? How will that be proportionate, basically? So that was the other thing that came out.
Thank you ever so much. On to room 3, Kelly.
Yes, hi everyone. So in our group, we focused firstly on customer experience, and then we went on to focus on the community and enabling suggested measures. So from a customer experience and outcomes side of things, there was highlighted that it was important to consider factors outside of the control of advisors and advice providers in any measurement. And there were some great examples about repeat clients consistently accessing services. How do we make sure that they get given all of the help that they need up front so they can achieve more long-term outcomes? Consideration of sustainability of outcomes is really important, and actually as well about how smaller outcomes right throughout the whole journey make a difference. It isn't always just those kind of longer term outcomes as well. A baseline or starting point, and then measuring the distance travelled and during and following the advice could be a really valuable way to measure that. And achieving positive longer term outcomes can be outside of a debt advisor's gift. Often dependencies elsewhere in a person's life can make a big difference. So yeah, some really interesting discussions there, and also around other services that really support longer term outcomes, particularly things like financial capability as well were highlighted. Then community and enabling suggested measures. We talked a little bit around advisor well-being, and particularly how this can be impacted by targets and volume expectations. So whilst the partnerships absolutely recognise that it's within their area to think about kind of advisor well-being, and we heard some great things about how partnerships are doing some of this at the moment on the ground. There's also this consideration for MAPS when thinking about what KPIs are going to look like, ensuring that possibly then doesn't hit out another thing such as advisor well-being and staff retention. Vulnerability and complexity of clients and their situations, definitely becoming a bigger problem for advisor, and how training is going to be super important here, but the needs for advisors need to be definitely given consideration to within the context of the whole service. And pay then was the final area that came up here. It is a factor in terms of making advisors feel valued both individually and as a community. And I think that the thread that kind of run through all of these things was ensuring that there's a model for consistency across, given how community-based debt advice is going to look. So what's happening in one organisation should be really consistent on all of these fronts with other organisations within the partnership as well.
Thank you ever so much, Kelly. Room 2, Madeline.
Thanks, Tamsin. So we focused on customer experience and outcomes and kind of merged those two conversations together a little bit. We talked about the pros and cons of providers measuring customer experience versus MAPS measuring customer experiences, because number of the providers in the room, so they do their own customer experience surveys, and we talked about some of the tensions there. So on the one hand, a customer may be more willing to respond to a survey from an organisation they know, but nevertheless it's very hard as a small organisation to focus on things like response rates, etc. So we've acknowledged that there are challenges to both options there, but a discussion to be had about it. We talked on outcomes, we talked a bit about some of the different sources of available data for outcomes, and those in our room were talking about the outcomes that they record on Casebook and Advice Pro, for example, you know, debt relief order, bankruptcy, etc. You know, those kind of hard outcomes in terms of what's happened as a result of the advice given, and whether or not they could usefully be incorporated into our outcomes measures as well. Following on from that, talked a bit about the challenges with data quality there. It's much easier to record an outcome when you've followed a customer through full casework and you know in a very solid way what's happened at the end, versus a customer who's had full advice and then gone off to do the actions themselves, and therefore you can estimate an outcome, but you can't necessarily guarantee an outcome in terms of the recording there. We also talked about the importance of contextual information and recording contextual information, particularly around clients with complex life circumstances, which may either prevent them from making full use of the debt advice services or mean that they are at risk of dropping out. And we also talked about the importance of looking at outcomes from a preventative point of view. So not just how much do we move someone forward in terms of their financial well-being journey, but how much do we actually stop them sliding into a much, much worse situation, homelessness, etc. So we'll have a little think about that. And then finally, just on a point that is eminently fixable, so Nadia, I shall pick this up with you soon, feedback that actually teams who are delivering debt advice maybe don't know enough about the surveys that we are delivering to be able to say to a customer, this is what you are consenting to if you agree to put your name forward and be in this survey. So I think that ties back to what someone else was saying about a closer relationship between supply chain and MAPS, and I think that's eminently fixable and we can do that very quickly.
Excellent. Thank you, Madeleine.
Yeah.
So last but not least, room one, Avon.
Hello, I'm loving all the feedback. There's going to be so much to take away, so thank you to everyone who contributed. Yeah, we had some really interesting discussions. We kind of started in outcomes and floated into customer experience, which seems to be a common theme. So we spoke about outcomes initially and had a really interesting conversation around the consideration of complexity of both financial and client needs when trying to link back to financial well-being outcome measurement. So linked to that, it kind of flowed into something that's come up here too, is around the sphere of influence for you know, debt advisors when they do that, whether a customer drops off and seeks their actual solution somewhere else, and how much can that actually be influenced. So an interesting discussion around kind of targeted measurement within the sphere of control for that, for both longer term outcomes, but also customer experience. And I think Kelly mentioned it as well, this kind of distance traveled started to end for interaction, so that came up too. Overburdening both those delivering and consumers around surveying and how much data and insight that we're gathering from them at different times. And then we kind of moved into some practical elements. So we've got something to go and research, which was really interesting. And then we were speaking around consistency in the systems and tools to allow to facilitate some of this stuff. You know, some of the lead organisations have a much more established infrastructure, and like it's come up already, existing surveying and insight that comes out to a good level, and it's really well used, and others not so much. So you know, we had a brief chat around MAPS's CX platform and how that could potentially help resolve some of those, some keen interest in that, so that's good to hear. And then I think it's probably been covered around outcomes. There's a distinct difference between kind of like hard outcomes and softer outcomes, and making sure that we're understanding the difference between the two and how we're actually truly measuring for consumers to be able to drive improvements for those particular areas, rather than kind of grouping it. Yes, we want to be holistic, but we need to be able to get some tangible results off the back of it, and that seems to be an area that we can focus on.
Thank you so much. So lots of food for thought there. I am just now sharing my screen. So during those conversations, your facilitators are obviously getting you to share your views, and the note takers were just putting in some key things in to a Slido. So I just thought it's helpful for people to be able to see what else was being said. So around outcomes, these are some of the key messages that we were hearing across all of the rooms. So I think we've covered quite a lot of this. I will screenshot this and add this to the end of the deck, which will be shared with you so you can see all of that. In customer experience, so we're seeing a lot of the things that we've just talked about there in terms of the data capture limitations and how we think about that when we're being flexible. Should we put in community and enabling? Yes, so we covered some of those. And then let's see what we've got under quality. Great. So as I say, I'll share these with all of you in the deck at the end. So I'm conscious that we're slightly behind time and I don't want to eat too much into Ben's section at the end. So let me just continue, hopefully, where we were in our presentation. Great. Okay, so now I'm just going to move on to talk about evaluation and learning plans just at a really high level. And it's an area that I'm super excited about, actually. So as we know, this grant is a really long-term investment in community debt advice. It's 5 + 2 + 2, so potentially 9 years. And as we've talked about, there's a real focus on improvement throughout the lifetime of the grant. But we know that that doesn't just happen until we actually really give it some dedicated time and resource. And at some of the regional events during the summer, we began to have some really interesting conversations about how the length of this grant provides the potential for some really interesting approaches to learning and how we might, as a whole network, maximize some of those opportunities. So therefore, I'm really thrilled to be able to let you know that MAPS have made the decision to fund both an independent evaluation partner and also a learning partner for the life of the grant. And that really is meaning that we're not treating evaluation as just a tick box exercise or a one-off review. It's a decade-long commitment to evidence and learning and improvement. And that evidence, that investing in that understanding about what works and where we might be able to do better, how we can enable our improvement ambitions rather than just compliance, feels really exciting. I think it's a real statement of intent into valuing learning and insight. So sort of in practice, what that will mean is it's about building and supporting a whole culture of learning, not just reporting, and it creates lots of opportunities for all of us to connect and create a real community of practice so we can engage and share expertise or challenges. And I think that the dedicated capacity of a learning partner will mean that we can involve everybody rather than just the grant leads, which I think creates an enormous opportunity for us all to learn from each other. So just a quick overview about what we anticipate those different partners will be doing. Our evaluation partner, their job is more about rigorous, impartial assessment of performance, of impact, and of economy, so looking at value for money. And they're going to be focusing on programme-wide evaluations, which helps to meet our obligations to government because it's public money. But we will also be tasking them with working locally with grant holders to support some of those continuous improvement ambitions. So that might be about using evaluation techniques to understand what type of community activities get the most engagement or increase reach, what are the ways in which we create long-term impact for clients. It might help us to think about retention and testing different approaches. So, all that kind of thing. And then our learning partner, I think, is where it gets really exciting because it's a bit different from how we have undertaken this in the past. They will help to provide that capacity and facilitation for regular forums and workshops and communities of practice. They'll help to kind of maybe share not only experience, but maybe troubleshoot some problems for other peers to be able to say, oh yeah, we've had that and we've tried this, didn't work, but now we tried this and it might be working. So I think that provides some really interesting opportunities for us, especially around things like workforce wellbeing and technology development. And both of the partners will engage with everybody from the start of the programme to understand context and priorities and challenges, and then coordinate to make sure that all of that learning is shared. So kind of day to day, we do want participation in the evaluation and learning, but we will be ensuring that it's designed to fit around delivery priorities, because fundamentally this is a delivery grant, not an innovation grant. However, we also want to make a commitment that the learning agenda priorities will be shaped by grant holders, and there will be lots of opportunity to share your expertise and learning from your peers. So really, I just wanted to kind of flag that it's rare but super valuable to have this kind of long-term investment in learning, and I really hope that you're as excited as I am about the opportunity that creates, because I think it means that we can be part of a network where you know, you're working with others who are really facing those similar issues, and so sharing that insight should provide some real value, and helps maybe to make the grants greater than their sum of their parts, and for our kind of collective involvement to help us all raise the bar together across those 9 years. So I will now hand over to Ben, who is going to talk to us about data.
Thanks, Tamsin. Hi everyone, my name is Ben Murphy. I'm a Senior Continuous Improvement Manager here at MAPS, working across our debt value stream. So I'm here ostensibly to talk about data, although I think this session will be a lot more about the why rather than the what. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, Tamsin. Thank you. So we've already had a look at performance indicators. We've looked at the sort of key thematic areas that we're interested in sort of measuring against: the core debt advice performance, the community performance, and the enabling performance. You've heard Nadia speak about grant management, and others talk to the evaluation and research element of the grant. So my job really is to talk us through a little bit around that box in the top right hand corner. So why the data requirements? Excuse me. I think today will be less about data requirements and more about, as I say, the why. So why might we ask for additional data? And the why is answered by the fact that we and the sector, I guess, have insight needs that go beyond just those things that are important to measure from a community-based debt advice perspective. So recognising that community-based advice exists within a much wider ecosystem of debt advice, both MAPS funded and otherwise, of creditors, of government, and of other sort of environmental factors. There are a number of things, a number of insight needs that MAPS has and the sector has, I think, more generally, that at the moment, a lot of which are being addressed by data. It's not the only route to achieving or addressing those insight needs, but right now we are sort of meeting those through requiring data from MAPS funded providers. So we know that community-based debt advice plays a key role in supporting people, particularly in the context of increasing complex needs, of vulnerable circumstances becoming more common and sometimes more deep-rooted. We also know from the 2024 consultation that we ran into our debt strategy that there's an appetite across the sector for MAPS to share better insight, to use evidence more effectively in decision making, and to articulate the value of community-based debt advice much more effectively. So our insight needs reflect that, really. You'll see from this, and we constantly challenge ourselves, and we constantly sort of review our insight needs, and this is sort of not quite a comprehensive sort of summary of them, but you see from this that ultimately we're looking at things that help support improving client outcomes and reducing client harm, strengthening the sector, understanding clients and barriers to accessing advice, supporting local planning, and also, benefiting advisors and the wider workforce as well. So those are kind of the aims, and I think what we're really keen to do, or what I'm really keen to do, is use this platform as an opportunity to kind of share those insight needs and begin to develop a mutual understanding and hopefully sort of appetite for these things. As I said before, like, we see these things as mutually beneficial for all actors within the debt advice sector. That said, we recognise the trade-offs involved that are often involved anyway between addressing those insight needs and building, evidence bases, and the sort of effort / broader implications of collecting that information, of storing it, of reporting, of analysing it, and so on. And I'll circle back to that point in a minute, but it's not lost on us that, there is a trade-off between insight value and the effort required or complexity required to sort of support or address those insight needs. As I say, we recognise the importance of developing a mutual understanding of these insight needs, which is why we're sort of sharing them now and being transparent over them. And also, developing a shared and agreed view of the importance of that insight, and that's really critical that we come together and do that. And then the next stage, I guess, is co-designing an approach which sort of maximises the availability and the quality of insight that's available, both for advisors, for advice providers, for MAPS, and for actors beyond, to sort of support, as I say, the sector and strengthen that, and deliver better client outcomes. Next slide, please, Tamsin. So, sharing, a comprehensive set of data requirements on that, A, isn't possible, and B, is probably quite unhelpful at this stage. We're still 24 months away, or over 24 months away, from sort of going live with a new set of community-based debt advice grants. However, I thought it might be useful just to kind of set out and give an indication of how we address some of those insight needs right now through requirements on MAPS-funded grantees. So, there's a number of returns that you can see on there. I've tried to set out sort of some examples or typical fields or indicators that we ask debt advice providers to give us information or data on, the frequency there as well. I'm not going to dwell on this slide for too long. As I say, it's just to give you an indication. I'm sure the slide deck will be shared post session. So if we can move us on to slide 4. What I did want to do, though, is circle back to some of those things that I've sort of touched on before, including the kind of trade-offs bit. So this slide shouldn't be entitled Insight Enablers. That's inaccurate considerations, maybe. But just a general list of things that I think we need to recognise and consider, and hopefully they'll prompt sort of some thinking on your part as well. So, as I say, like, it's really important that we arrive at a common understanding of an agreement really on the use cases for insight, and then how we get to that insight, how we develop that insight, is sort of another, I guess, sequential next question. But it's not about what data we collect, it's about what do we need to know. That's the first thing, and we need to arrive at, as I say, a mutually agreed place for that. And then it's recognising, acknowledging those trade-offs, as I sort of mentioned before, and sort of arriving at a point where where we understand the value of insights, we understand sort of the effort that it takes to collect, report, analyse, and so on through the data life cycle. And land on, a set of sort of ways, methods of producing insight, whether that's data, whether that's, qualitative methods, whatever it might be. And getting to a point where, we're comfortable that we're meeting the kind of priority needs in a way that's as effortless as possible. So that would be a current state, and then reviewing that current state, so keeping that current state under review. Things will change over time. Technology will mature and improve and become more available. The more that we work together, the better common understanding we will have of sort of data standards, definitions, quality, and so on. And that enables us to reflect on that kind of balance of those trade-offs and whether actually things become more achievable. Can we, you know, now meet this insight need in a different way, or actually is it an insight need that we can meet? So keeping that under review is important. We also acknowledge the importance of clear and consistent data standards. So, you know, that's an area where we aim to be much clearer and provide sort of predictability in terms of things like data formats, data dictionaries, the quality of information that sort of meets all of our collective needs, governance matters, and so on. And we know that that kind of predictability can then support any investment decisions that perhaps are required on the part of debt advice providers. We'll talk to technology. You know, it won't be lost on anyone on this call that, you know, as technology matures and, you know, AI becomes more ubiquitous and so on, has the potential to lower or even remove barriers to some of those data lifecycle areas, like collecting information, structuring it, reporting it, analysing it, and so on. And it also offers potentially the opportunity to kind of offer insight into the kind of complexities and nuances of debt advice and the debt advice journey that perhaps right now is not possible through the more sort of or through the kind of data collection techniques and reporting techniques that we have available to us right now. And then finally, but not finally, so last but not least, I guess, is relationships. So what's also really important, and, you know, alluded to in the first point here as well, is that we work together in this space. So, you know, critical to kind of build trust, understanding, consistency of approach, of the inferences and interpretations made of different data points and so on and so forth. But also really important when we're talking about change that we're close together so that we understand and can sort of you know, adopt a cadence that meets the kind of like optimal pace of change. Sorry, lots of basically work at a pace that isn't too quick or too slow. Forgive the jargon. And if we can move on to the next one, please, Tamsin. Thank you. So what I can't do, again, as I said before, what would be really unhelpful is to kind of tell you what decisions you might need to make around resourcing and capability in this space. But what I can do right now, and what we can do, is think about at a very summary, sort of high level, the types of capability and resources that might be required, given the kind of landscape as we know it. So certainly, you know, consideration around data collection and capability to kind of accurately collect data and information, including from clients, that will still obviously be required. It's a very important part of the advice journey and a regulatory requirement on top. So, which meet, you know, our shared collective performance and insight needs, but at the same time acknowledging accessibility and client experience in that kind of trade-off piece. So, you know, there will almost certainly be a need to think about data storage and the design of that data storage, the kind of adaptability and scalability of any environments that you're using, systems that you've got in play. I don't think any of these things will be new to any organisation that's delivering debt advice right now. So hopefully that's also reassuring. Ability to report, so like, you know, capability to kind of extract information from any systems that you're using to store data and sort of share that in line with grant requirements, the data formats and so on. The ability or capability to kind of ensure that data lines up with agreed data standards around quality, validation, and some form of expertise, I guess, across the kind of data landscape, the systems you're using, the processes, and so on, to ensure that you know, that's kind of maintained and sustained throughout the grant life cycle. And then, you know, one eye on sort of future proofing, so maintaining expertise and having sort of access to technology that can maintain a pace of change throughout what might be a fairly long grant term. Thanks, Tamsin. I think we've got a very short period available for Q&A on this section, so we'll get to that, I guess, in about 30 seconds. This slide is just a few prompt questions. It's not the only things that you might be thinking about or want to kind of share questions on and have answers about. If we don't get to them in the 5 minutes, because it is only 5 minutes, and please do share them in the Q&A bit of the chat. I don't know quite what we're using, but of the team session, there is a survey that we'll send out as a follow-up, and any questions, concerns, suggestions, feedback more generally that you have in any of these areas or beyond, obviously would be really, really helpful for us. So thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Ben. Yes, so as Ben just trailed there, we've got about 5 minutes now, maybe 6. If anybody has got any burning questions on a reflection either from the first section about performance or this second section about data and evaluation and learning, so feel free to put questions into the chat or raise your hand or just turn your mic on to speak. While we're waiting to see if people have got questions, I think obviously, as we've mentioned, there will be a follow-up survey for everybody to put their kind of feedback into to help us to iterate and refine our approach here. And I think it's quite useful to think about that in maybe sort of 2 ways. The first is, does your organisation have all the information that you need about our approach to evidence and performance? So is it clear what's expected? Do you feel confident about what's involved if you want to submit an expression of interest and a full application? If you need more information related to evidence in order to have confidence and comfort that you will be able to meet that when you are putting in an application, can you in the feedback be really specific about what it is that would help you? What is it that there might be a gap between what we have provided and what you might need? And then the second part that you might want to think about is is what we're putting forward focusing on measuring what really matters and keeping that proportionate? So anything that you can suggest in terms of improving or simplifying or making things more relevant, we are really keen to hear your views on. So that might just be a way to think about the 2 sort of key things that are useful to make sure are covered in your feedback. Okay, so whilst I was filling there, do we have questions? I can see we've got a comment in the chat where people are excited about the learning partner. Me too. And yes, training. I don't know if we've got any colleagues who can speak at all to training. I think we might have covered that in a previous session as well. So no burning questions. I will take that as a win then, that we hopefully have covered content that has been useful. And as I say, you can go back and reflect on these slides, and you've got an opportunity to feed further into our thinking. Okay, because this is the opportunity to shape that thinking, and it's a very long-term grant, so we want to make sure that we are thinking about that right. But it's useful to just outline that it is going to be our intention that we will be reviewing the measures and data and performance throughout. I think we've made a commitment that every 2 years we'll do more of a formal review just to check that those are still the most relevant and useful bits of information that we could be getting, and also measuring performance on, given the length of this grant. Okay, well, I'll move on then to talk about next steps. So there's going to be some more in-person sessions. Hopefully people will have received email communication about these. We're going to start with the round 1 areas, and these will be lot specific. So previously when we did in person, they were regional specific, but now, as we know, some of those lots are sub-regional. So though there will be 9 in-person events to reflect the 9 lots in round 1. And they will cover these areas: East and West Midlands, the North West, Yorkshire and Humber. If you go onto our dedicated webpage, you will find the information and be able to sign up to them. The agenda for those will be in the morning, lots of networking opportunities, so people across those lots can get to know each other. And there's an opportunity for you, if you wanted to be able to put forward, platform your organisation, your key strengths, the reach in your community, maybe any specialisms. Then there will be a section on some more key topics, and when you sign up to these events, you'll have a list of topics to choose from, and the topics that will be put on will be event specific. They will be those topics that have been chosen as the most popular by the attendees of each of those events. And then in the afternoon there will be a focus on applications, so the criteria, the process, the questions, and then after the 9 in person there will be 1 online event, and that is not only for those people who are unable to attend the in-person, but it's from round 1, but also it's open to anybody from round 2. And we think that's helpful because whilst obviously we will iterate in round 2 and build on lessons learned, I doubt that anything is going to be completely different in the process. So if you want to help shape the process, the questions, and feed your views in before the direction is set, then do attend that online event. Matthew, I think there's some questions about registering in the chat. If you want to just reply to people, that would be great. So just as a bit of a wrap up then, and to hear back from all of you, I think that the kind of key takeaways that we want you to reflect on from today is that obviously our aim is for data to be purposeful, not burdensome, and that we are building this together. We want those performance measures to be meaningful and practical and really reflect our ambition, but also complexity that sits within community-based advice. And we want to look at that picture as a whole, not just in isolated KPI measures. So we are really looking at how well things are done, not just what gets done. And as Kelly was talking about, some of those performance assurances will happen through conversations and learning, not through targets, but that everything in our evidence approach not only fits with our overall ambitions, but it also fits completely with our MAP standards, ensuring that across the board there is consistency and quality and accountability. So as we've trailed, there is a survey each of those topic areas around outcomes and client satisfaction. They are just 1 question. It allows you just to put any of your views about any of those topics against each of those areas. I think only 1 question is mandatory, so if you have only got a view about 1 area, don't worry, the survey won't overwhelm you. We're going to leave it open across the Christmas break, and it will close in the 2nd week of January. But if you could complete it this side of Christmas while your thoughts are fresh from this webinar, then that would be great. We've also included on this slide the links to our dedicated webpage and our contact email. And so all of the resources from this webinar and previous webinars will all be on our dedicated webpage. And these slides will be going out to everybody I'm going to look to Amy the next week or so.
Yes, they should be aiming for next week.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. So I hope that you found this session helpful, and thank you so much for all of your time.